but we've offered 100% of the inspection jobs.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Jeffries.
I think most of my questions have been answered at this point. Frustration, and we've all sat in the same rooms and tried to negotiate some resolution and been unable to move the ball forward. 18,000 jobs at risk. It's hard to see how we're going to let 12 jobs kill 18,000 jobs. Not sure the good public policy in that. I do, however, get the argument on the safety quality issues that have been raised on the inspections. And if if an inspector cannot take his or her issues with a quality control issue to a sympathetic ear to make sure that the public is going to get a safe road, if that's their argument, then there should be some effort to address that argument to make sure that somebody within Caltrans is going to be made aware of that disputed issue, not that there is a paper trail we can look back a year later. Somebody in Caltrans needs to be aware that an inspector raised an issue and that a resident engineer who may not be Caltrans denied that issue. Then what does that inspector do to verify or to make sure that somebody's going to hear it who should otherwise hear it? In my mind, that solution can easily be addressed by simply having a Caltrans resident engineer added to the component, so that if the private sector resident engineer turns them down, that Caltrans inspector has the ability to then go to a designated Caltrans resident engineer who can then take it up to management. Who's responsible for the entire project. And then the issue of public safety, quality control, is then, in my mind, relatively addressed or resolved before the project's ever finished and we're going back a year later disputing whether or not there should have been extra this or extra that. So I think that's an easy fix, personally, but then I'm not RCTC. The issue of compromise that's been made to date to bump up to 100% of the inspectors, very, very generous of you, but I think it's necessary to get the compromise. If we can't get a compromise based on all of these abilities, we've got bigger problems in the state of California, and I am not going to sit here today to be a part of killing 18,000 jobs. My position is we pass this bill, we get it done, and we direct both parties to do everything humanly possible to come up to a final solution before this puppy reaches the floor and we have to vote on it. Because nobody should be suing everybody. Nobody should be countersuing, private sector or public sector. This project's got to move forward. And I don't want to be the one, I'm not going to be the one who's going to stand out there and take the blame for killing this project, because that public outrage would be enormous and it would be bad policy.
We have several more speakers, and then hopefully we can draw this to a conclusion. Mr. Solorio, followed by Mr. Furutani. I believe Mr. Norby wanted to say something. Ms. Galgiani, were you waiting or not? I'm putting you in the line.
Okay.
So, hang on.
In the line. Okay.
Mr. Solorio.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members. We've had a lot of Q&A, and I know we're going to have more, so I'll save that for the rest of you. I would be willing to support this measure today if the author makes a commitment to amend the bill to account for 100% of the construction inspection services to be done by public employees, and that as the bill moves forward, assuming it does that, we continue to work in a collaborative fashion to figure out how to address this issue of resident engineers. One place to look for might be the Cogdill bill to see to what extent, if any, the Cogdill law took that into account. So that for me is important, because I do believe that if the private sector is building something, that we really should have a public entity inspecting it and signing it off to make sure that it's safe for the users. So that for me is big, and knowing that along the way we'll continue to address some of these issues. I'm also hopeful that our public employee friends will continue to work in good faith because I think you have, and that hopefully by the end of this process we have a commitment to move forward and build it together without any lawsuits or obstacles, because I do think we need to build this and build it soon.
Assembly member, if I can go back on the language, I just want to make sure that, because I believe what you had mentioned was that 100% of the inspection would be done by public employees. And that may well be the case, but I don't believe under Prop 35 we have the legal authority to dictate private or public. What we do is we dictate the authority back to Caltrans, and they end up deciding whether they use public
well, we
or
could work
private.
that out, but I think through the Cogdill law from last year, that's essentially where we ended up at, and there was a lot of discussion. So I would think that that's a safe area, with the goal being, the goal that we have 100% of the construction inspectors be public employees. And again, we have the Cogdill law, and I know Assemblymember Galgiani pointed to other references used in the past. So I think we can get there.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to, Mr. Furutani, if you could wait just a moment. Ms. Galgiani, you wanted to correct your statement.
I just would like to make sure that either you or staff check with Ledge Council on that. There may have been some question on may, shall. So that being said, it'd be a good idea to just check with Ledge Council.
The intention is what's going to matter.
Yes.
But we need to make sure we're legally correct.
Thank you. Mr. Furutani.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just really quickly, I think that the conversation from Mr. Jeffries and Mr. Solorio is moving this in the right direction. The issue of 12 employees versus 18,000 is not the issue. If all you got to do is pay 12 employees to get 18,000 jobs, I'm sure we can work that out. The issue is inspection and checks and balances. That's the issue. And whether it's going to work or not work, I think that we have some examples that were negotiated last budget cycle, but we haven't seen any of them come to fruition, so I'm not sure if it's going to be any better. I mean, we have examples of private firms doing their business, and as a result of that, we have the worst environmental disaster in the Gulf of Mexico that there's ever been in the world. So I think a checks and balance to me makes sense. And the driving principle, the guiding principle, is not to be an obstructionist or to cause a problem. It's to make sure it's done right. And so the combination that I think Mr. Jeffries, Mr. Solorio was talking about, getting to that point is where I think the compromise is, and it works for everybody in terms of doing what you need to do. And I appreciate it's all being funded by the Riverside County. That's great, but it happens to be a state freeway that you're going to be adding to, so it's not like an absolutely private venture. So I think the pieces are there. I would like very much to see this resolved so we can vote on it and move it forward. But unless we get some consideration of that and some of the wording, I think it's going to be hard for me to vote on this at this point till I see that.
Well, I believe our commitment to moving towards 100% of the inspection jobs is a huge step. As Mr. Solorio pointed out, we can go back to the Cogdill language and look at that and see where it could or could fit or could not fit. I think we're all discussing pieces that are moving in the right direction. I don't know if the opponents agree, but I think we are, and I think that should and we completely agree. Safety, quality needs to be job one.
We have one more comment, Mr. Norby.
Design build works. I've seen it work in Orange County when I sat on the Orange County Transportation Authority, a body just like the RCTC, totally locally funded. Fixed a state freeway, first time it had been worked on in 40 years, with local money. It was done under budget. It was done quicker than it would have done conventionally. There needs to be checks and balances, but we're not turning this operation over to a private entity as a state. RCTC is a public entity with all the accountability that we have. They're all locally elected officials, and I know they'll do an outstanding job of this vital corridor, which is the only link between the Inland Empire and the job centers of Orange County. So I support it.
Thank you very much. I have two more comments, Mr. Eng and then Mr. Portantino.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll make this very brief. One of the concerns that has been raised, obviously, is the justification is a figure about the jobs. And my concern, of course, is for that, but it's also the fact that the Caltrans engineers represent an important workforce to the state of California as well. And they're experienced, they have the skills, they have the qualifications. And too often, the state of California has farmed out jobs that we could do. I think at one point we had about $40 billion worth of jobs that we had farmed out by individual positions that we could have performed here. So, what I'm going to do is I'm very concerned about that, and I think that when it comes to inspections of state highways, I think it's very important that we have the right people for the right job. I'm willing to vote for the bill today to try to understand whether that's true or not, whether we're going to be able to have state workers who are qualified, who are experienced, perform the positions for which they were hired. Because of amendments that are offered, it seems like you're heading in a certain direction. I'm going to be laying off if it comes to the floor, if I'm not absolutely satisfied that you're not just talking about jobs in one sector, but that you're also talking about protecting jobs with our existing state workforce as well, because they certainly can do the job.
Thank you. Mr. Portantino.
Yes, Madam Chair. I'm just trying to understand. So with respect to Mr. Solorio's comments, you've agreed, Mr. Miller, to accept his suggested goal. And with respect to Ms. Galgiani's language to make it compliant with current law, you've also accepted that. And so that's what would be before us. And then I would just like to get further clarification. Does that, so restating current law, does that satisfy the parties involved in this discussion? I mean, or are we still going to wait to see what it looks like? I'm just trying to get clarification of what's actually going to be voted on and how it plays with both proponents and opponents.
Well, Ms. Galgiani's language it puts us in the right direction. Mr. Solorio's language, I think, is doing the same thing. My comments were curtailed only to the degree that there might be some legal issue as to whether we can dictate on an amendment that every position is a public employee. I mean, we know the project alone creates 200 new public employee positions, but I don't know if we can go to the degree, and I think Mr. Topping would agree that might be a little bit too extreme, but I think the language Ms. Galgiani offers clearly puts us in the direction that we're offering them 100% of the inspection positions, and we've got to continue to work and iron out a few of the other details as we move forward.
Mr. Miller, my understanding is that we will not take an amendment today because we won't do the wording today because I don't think we're ready for the wording, but there has been a very clear intention of the people sitting here on the dais. And so I would suggest that there be a motion to move this forward with an understanding that all the clarification that has been discussed here will happen before it reaches the floor.
I'll make that motion.
Perfect. Thank you.
So we have a motion and a second, and I think it is understood that there was a tremendous amount of movement that occurred today in this discussion to try to meet the needs of the Caltrans engineers as well as the people who have developed this project. And without that understanding, it's just either not going to reach the floor or not going to get out of the floor. So with that, Madam Chair, could you call the roll, please? Madam Secretary.
Motions do pass. Lowenthal?
Aye.
Lowenthal, aye. Jeffries?
Aye.
Jeffries, aye. Bill Berryhill? Aye. Bill Berryhill, aye. Blumenfield? Buchanan? Buchanan, aye. Ing? Ing, aye. Furutani?
Aye.
Furutani, aye. Galgiani? Galgiani, aye. Hayashi? Miller?
Aye.
Miller, aye. Nilo? Nilo, aye. Norby? Aye. Norby, aye. Portantino? Solorio? Solorio, aye. 11-0. Bill's out.
11-0, your bill is out. Mr. Miller, we have a lot of work to do between
Thank you. Thank you,
now and
members.
then.
I greatly appreciate your support.
Kevin?
Okay, folks, we still have one more bill, and I think a couple are left to resolve, some that are on call. Staff is going to present for Senator Kehoe on SB 1340. Thank you, sir. Please present.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Gil Topidi. Thank you for the courtesy of presenting SB 1340 on behalf of Senator Christine Kehoe. I'll try to be brief. SB 1340 is really all about the smooth transition toward
Move the
electric
bill.
vehicles.
Second.
And just those two quick things.
Just trying to help you out. It's a good bill.
Okay, and with that, I defer to my support. Thank you, Assemblymember Solorio.
Do we have any members, witnesses in support?
Yes, Eileen Tutt with the California Electric Transportation Coalition. I'm the executive director there. I just want to say that electric vehicles are coming to this state. It's very exciting. We have a number of automakers that have committed to bringing these cars to the state. They will reduce our dependence on petroleum, clean our air, and help us with our climate change issues. So one of the most important parts, or the most important issues around electric transportation, is whether or not people charge their vehicles at home. It's very important. It ensures the safety, reliability, and efficiency of the grid. So we urge your support.
Mr. Chairman and members, Randy Chin with Southern California Edison. We support the bill.
Thank you.
It's done.
Everyone else, please just state your name and position for the record.
Thank you.
Tom Addison with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and on behalf of the State Association, CAPCOA, in support.
Dan Cobb, Union Concerned Scientists, we support the bill. Thank you.
Bonnie Holmes-Jan with the American Lung Association in California in support.
Do you have any others in support? Any opposition? Not seeing any. Members, any questions? All's quiet. That's good. All right. Do we have a motion? We have a motion and a second. Call the roll, please. Oh, you know what? I ought to let you close.
Respectfully, on behalf of Senator Kehoe, request an aye vote.
Very good. Superb closing.
The motions do pass to local government. Lowenthal? Jeffries?
Aye.
Jeffries, aye. Bill Berryhill? Aye. Berryhill, aye. Blumenfield? Buchanan? Buchanan, aye. Ing? Ing, aye. Furutani?
Aye.
Furutani, aye. Galgiani? Galgiani, aye. Hayashi? Miller? Miller, aye. Nilo? Nilo, no. Norby? Portantino? Portantino, aye. Solorio? Solorio, aye. 9-0, the bill's out.
Bill is out on a 9-0 vote. Thank you very much. All right, members, we have some bills that are on call, and we're going to go through them one time, and this will be painful.
You're scaring me. Is this a consent calendar? Yes, at 9-1.
9-1. Last bill was 9-1. Sorry on that. It's been a long day.
I know. Let's go.
Okay, before you get started, you have a bill that has no second.
Oh, right. Yes.
We need to bring that one back up.
This one's from
We need to bring it back up to get a motion in a second.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much.
We have
No second. Right.
Oh.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a bill that was previously presented earlier. It did not get a second at the time. That is item number 12, SB 1445 by Senator DeSaulnier. We need to get a second to have the roll reopened on that. We have a second. Very good. Now we will go back to the votes on the other outstanding ones, or whatever order you'd like.
Yeah, we can go in order. That's fine.
Okay, first item to open the roll on would be the consent. Unless I've taken you completely out of order.
That's okay. Okay. Consent calendar. Absent members, Blumenfield. Ing. Aye. Ing, aye. Furutani.
Aye.
Furutani, aye. Hayashi. Aye. Hayashi, aye. Miller.